Neat Nation, what's up? Welcome to the Droopy Whiskey channel this evening, where I'm going to sip some whiskey here, and we're going to talk about the Kentucky Bourbon Trail. It's kind of a cool thing. Specifically, I have 5 tips. 5 tips for you if you're going to the Kentucky Bourbon Trail, things that might help you out. If you're a newbie and you're trying to navigate on your own, you can make a lot of mistakes. You will. Now, granted, your mistakes are very low risk. There's only so much trouble you can get into on the Kentucky. Well, I take that back. There's a lot of trouble you can get into, but not like messing up your agenda. That said, I'm going to spare you a little bit of headache and try and maximize the value you get out of your trip on the Kentucky Bourbon Trail. And like with most of my videos, keep in mind, this is just my straight take, not being paid by Kentucky, as delightful as that would be, to make this video. Now, one quick note thing to say is that this is coming out of my current planning of a trip to the Kentucky Bourbon Trail with my dad and my youngest brother. It's going to be pretty rad. End of July, we leave. Well, my brother is flying into Milwaukee. We're driving out of here July 20th and meeting my dad that evening in Kentucky. It's going to be sick. It's going to be sick. Dad's going to be with us couple and a half days. And then the bro and I got 3 extra days on top of that. So let's get into it. 5 tips to maximize the dankness of your trip to the Kentucky Bourbon Trail. Number 1 is you have to plan ahead. This did not used to be the case. You used to be able to just go down and basically jump on any tour. Can't do it anymore. That ship has sailed. You have to want it. You have to book your tours well in advance on the distilleries' websites. And I'm talking well in advance. My trip is not for another 4 weeks, and there were tours I wanted to get on that I could not get on. So, we're talking 2 months out. Lord knows how far the Buffalo Trace distillery tours are booked out right now because they're all free, which is crazy. That's good for them. They've got a lot of people coming through Buffalo Trace right now. So I'm going to say if you're going, particularly in peak season, summertime, you probably want to have booked out before spring break. Hopefully, like after, we're still in the aftermath of COVID here, and so I think now that people are like, I'm vaccinated, I'm free, or you just don't care, you just go anyway, which is whatever. There's just a lot of people headed to Kentucky right now, so be mindful of that. That may be the case in the longer term future as Kentucky bourbon tourism continues to boom. So plan ahead, book your tours online at least 60 days in advance. I got bailed out by a friend who's hooking me up with an inn with a tour that I would have missed. So that's not great. Tip number 2, you should take different tours. Like the deal for one of the problems, I guess, with going from distillery to distillery to distillery and taking their standard run-of-the-mill tour is it's all the same. Like, sure, they'll tell you about their slightly different mash bill, and, sure, they'll tell you about how their ancestors were the first to do this or that or the other. But, you're there to learn, as much as you can about bourbon and the process. So my recommendation is take 1, maybe 2 of the standard tours, and then try and book some of the more exotic tours. For instance, Buffalo Trace has their Taylor tour. Bardstown Bourbon Company, this is the tour I'm going on in next month, has their barrel thieving tour. Makers has a couple different kinds of tours focusing on different things. So my recommendation to you when you book is don't book all the standard tours. Like, try and get yourself some diversity of knowledge here, otherwise you're going to get bored, particularly if you're trying to hit up 6 to 8 different distilleries. What helps is alcohol makes even the most mundane activities more interesting, or at least more fun, maybe more sleepy. But ideally, you're going to take a lot away from your trip. So in your planning ahead, make sure you try and book some of these more exotic tours after you hit 1 or 2 introductory kind of gateway tours, call them that. Tip number 3, that would be, don't be afraid to hit up the small guys. There's a craft tour trail, craft distillery trail. There's one of those. And there's some really interesting small operations right along the main path, not far off the beaten path. For instance, you can go to Peerless Distillery, you can go to Angel's Envy, you can go to Rabbit Hole, you can go to Michter's if they were open for tours right now, but they will be open again. All those are in Louisville, right off Whiskey Row. That's pretty cool. Then you head out further east, there's Wilderness Trail out there, not too far away from either Bardstown or Lawrenceburg. So if you're seeing Wild Turkey, Four Roses, or any of the joints in Bardstown, it's not too far to jump out and see Wilderness Trail. Also, Castle and Key. Soup's close to Buffalo Trace, so you're going to see Buffalo Trace. Well, that's interesting. Maybe you should get over and see the old Taylor Distillery, which is now Castle and Key. I think in some of those newer places, you are also going to experience maybe some more unique. You're going to see some newer stuff, some more unique methods of operating, because Wild Turkey has kind of been doing the same thing since Jimmy was born, which was a long time ago. There's a lot of cool people doing a lot of cool things in whiskey, so don't hesitate to maybe forego seeing another monstrosity. Maybe don't go to Woodford Reserve and instead go to Castle and Key. Maybe don't go to 1792 Barton. Make sure you hit up Willett for sure. Tip number 4, this is very, very important. You're spending a lot of time on the road drinking a lot. Of course, I'm not an advocate for overconsumption, but when you're doing multiple bourbon tours, you're going to bourbon-centric restaurants, you drink a decent amount of bourbon when you're on the trail. So you need to prioritize 2 things just to make it through your trip and feel like a human being at the end of it. One is prioritize water. The second one is prioritize sleep. So it's tough because you're often on this journey with friends and family, and so you want to be up late talking, and then you get up, to do your thing in the morning. Just make sure you allow ample time from head hit pillow to alarm goes off. Probably 9 hours, because your sleep's going to be garbage with your body processing all that alcohol. It will be slightly easier for your body to process all that alcohol if you're just peeing like a maniac. So drink a lot of water, flush that crap out of your system. It'll help you recover and get you ready to do it all over again. So sleep and water. Tip number 5, kind of related to sleep and water, is it's helpful to plan some alternative activities. You want to break up that tour after tour after tour marathon, freaking marathon. And there's a lot of pretty swell stuff to do in Kentucky, even bourbon related stuff that's not going to distilleries. For me, you guys know this, Swing Nation, I'm going golfing a lot. Like every morning a round of golf and every afternoon bourbon stuff. So it's going to help me stay active. It's also going to put the sleep thing, it's going to make getting enough sleep a little bit difficult because we're talking about 7 to 8 o'clock tea times. So yeah, early bedtimes, that's what we're doing. Anyway, a lot of good golf around Kentucky if you're looking for it, and I've done my research. Downside of Kentucky tea times though is they only open up those tea times 7 days in advance, so you can't book your trip out, which kind of bites. But there's plenty of great hiking, camping, plenty of food to eat, killer food scene. Granted, COVID not great for restaurants, but a lot of them stuck it out, hung through it, so I'm stoked to eat while I'm there. The other bourbon related activities too really come to mind as primary. One would be a tour of Vendome. They make stills. They're primary still manufacturer and maintainer for American whiskey distilleries in the United States. The other pretty rad tour would be Independent Stave Company. You want to see a real life actual Mondo cooperage. Independent Stave, they're kind of the industry leader, so check out Independent Stave, ISC or Vendome, and you might learn some cool stuff about bourbon and the process that you didn't when you're just hitting up the distilleries, because granted, it's going to be a different perspective on the industry. So that's it. Those are the 5 I'm really keeping in mind as I go. But of course, I'm going to give you a couple other bones here. One of those is that if you're going to eat, which you are, obviously, you're going to eat somewhere. There's 2 places you have to eat. I'm going to eat at both these places. both in Bardstown, miles from each other. One, Bardstown Bourbon Company's Bottled and Bond Kitchen and Bar. Killer cocktails. I'm not a cocktail guy, but unbelievable cocktails. And killer food. Gonna eat there, no doubt. And then the bar at Willett. Now, they're not open super late. You need a reservation. But the egg salad sandwich at the bar at Willett. Now, I wish I would have discovered this. I did not. Brian Bikey, my co-host over at the Entry Proof podcast and on many Thursday night live streams, awesome dude, introduced me to the egg salad sandwich at the bar at Willett. There's even an egg salad sandwich Instagram account that Brian started in dedication to this sandwich. It's phenomenal. Their oysters too, unbelievable. Emphasis on the details at Willett. So I recommend you hit up those joints. The one tour, I would say you need to prioritize it. You need to try and do it if you can. It's a little bit off the beaten path, and it's a little bit surprising. That's Maker's Mark. So it's in Loretta, which is south of Bardstown. It's on the way to nothing, like literally nothing. It's out in the middle of butt crack nowhere, and it's owned. It's one of the biggest bourbon producers in the U.S. It's owned by Beam Suntory. So it's got a lot of things where I'm like, yeah, why would I go out to Maker's Mark? But on that tour, it's such a cool campus, number one. And then Maker's does some things that other people just don't do. So like the uniqueness of their campus and their process makes the tour worthwhile. And they do a great job with everything. So hospitality, pretty killer. I think it's worth the trip out to Loretta to see Maker's Mark. Now, I didn't talk at all today about bourbon hunting. There are a lot of tips related to how to score great bourbon on the Bourbon Trail. That's another video, and I may make that when I come back. I published a video before my last trip to Kentucky. The audio-visual quality of that video was garbage, but it's still up. You can see it. That was What Did I Buy on my Louisville trip, because that's the only place I was Louisville. Now I'm going to kind of be all around Kentucky, even making it up to the Cincinnati area on this next trip. So I'll probably do a video, much better AV quality, recapping this trip and what I bought, and I'll drop plenty of tips for bourbon hunting on the Kentucky Bourbon Trail. There's actually also a podcast, Entry Proof Podcast. I mentioned that down in the show notes. Brian and I recorded with some tips on how you can score some good bourbon if you're on the trail. If you're going there before I can make my next video, maybe check out that podcast. If you want to follow along with the journey, check me out on Instagram at Drew P. Whiskey. It's a good place to get some supplemental content. I post a few times a week, and I'll go live normally once a week there and just run through a quick tasting or two. Then if you want to support the channel, the Entry Proof Podcast, go to patreon.com/entryproofpodcast. Be pretty swell. All right, y'all. Have a good trip. Stay healthy, stay safe, and keep it neat.